But this weekend it is cutting boards. So I want to cover some basic woodworking and talk about a couple different techniques for making cutting boards. One of the biggest hiccups in any kind of woodworking is the tooling. You know, if you have $10,000 in your pocket, you can come into a store like this and buy lots of machinery to make something as simple as a cutting board, but that's really not necessary. So today I want to go over a couple really basic techniques for cutting boards, what kind of woods you might use, some of the different techniques for shaping and making them. Before we start, has anyone here made some cutting boards before? Yeah, cutting board maker as well. Yeah, very good. So they'll generally fall into a couple different categories. You might be making a laminated cutting board made out of different species, or maybe all one species, or you may be using a solid piece of wood and shaping it into whatever kind of board you'd like. When it really starts out with those, the question of what are you going to be using the board for? Is it going to be a functional board that you're going to be chopping on and using for preparation of veggies or meats? So in that case, you look at a board like this. It's a long grain butcher block. It's made out of hard maple. And this would be ideal for something like food prep, because maple has a really close grain wood. It's really hard, and it's going to be less prone to soaking in any kind of bacteria, and it won't really allow different molds to kind of fester and stick in the grain. But if you want something that's more decorative, maybe a bread board, a cheese board, something that'll be used for presenting, you know, maybe it'll be out for the holidays, then you can go with maybe some exotic hardwoods to add some color. I want to pass some of these around so that you can look at the grain. I'm going to pass around a piece of maple as well. If you look at the grain, a test I usually do is I drag my fingernail across the wood. And you'll notice on any of those colorful ones, the exotics, even that walnut, you can see that the grain is really open. And that's what I was talking about, harboring bacteria. For a functional board, that's not the greatest option versus maple, which is really tight and closed grain. So everybody see that? So I want to start off with a really basic board and kind of talk about how, you know, the approach or what the technique would be for that. If you come into a place like this, you might find some hardwoods. You know, maybe a piece of cherry, and maybe you don't have the tools to cut it out into the shape you want. So what you could do, you could buy this board from us. You can do some sketching on it with your pencil. You know, maybe you just want to circle, draw whatever it is that you'd like, and then you can always bring it back to us if you don't have tools, and we have a shop and we can cut it out on the bandsaw for you. So that's an approach. Another approach might be maybe you found this really cool piece of maple that looks really funky, and maybe you're just going to be cutting bread on it. Maybe it just needs surface preparation, sanding, and then oiling. So maybe that doesn't require as much tooling. Or if you want to do a laminated board, you might come in and buy lots of these little strips that you can glue together yourself. All right. As far as the laminated boards go, supplies, of course, all you're really going to need is glue to keep it all together. I actually glued one up earlier today. Preferred glue for cutting boards is Type Bond 3. It's FDA approved for indirect food contact. It's waterproof, so it doesn't mean that when you're done with your board you're going to want to be soaking it in the sink to clean it, but it is going to hold up better than any other glue, really. So for wood-to-wood contact, that glue is going to do really well. The only thing I've done to this board so far, besides gluing it up, is I trimmed the edges square. So you can see these little scraps. I'm not going to, if you want, you can try to, feel free to break it. It will break, it's all end grain. But just to kind of show how strong, yeah, break it in. So wood glue is relatively strong though. So for long grain to long grain, it's going to be plenty strong.
And what you're saying is the glue joint is stronger than the wood itself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I want to take a look at this board. Again, all I've done with this is glued it up and trimmed it square. When I glued it up, I was very careful to make sure that I could get the face as flat as I could. If you don't get it so flat, that's when you're going to need like a planer or a drum sander to really bring it down to smooth. So by paying attention when you're gluing it up, you can usually clean these up with just a card scraper, a little piece of metal with a burr on it, and then doing some sanding. So I want to show you real quickly how effective something like that scraper can be when cleaning up a cutting board. It is helpful if you have a sturdy work surface, of course. I'm going to use these little clamps on the bench, little bench dogs. Clamp into place. Try to clear. Carol, you might be blocked over there. I'm just going to take this card scraper. I'm just going to start cleaning the surface of this board here. So I can tell immediately that that walnut was a little high. I'm starting to take the walnut off first. With just a few passes, you can really start to clean up the surface. There's a really aggressive burr on the scraper. Let's try this little one here. Okay, so I want to take a few passes of this with the scraper and pass this board around so you can kind of see what we're accomplishing here. All right, I'm going to pass that around. You can obviously feel where I haven't scraped yet. The idea is that with just a little bit of hand work, you can get those cleaned up to a point where you're ready to sand and start applying finish. I'm kind of jumping around a little bit here. I do want to walk through maybe just gluing one up so you kind of can see the process. We are relying on just the glue, so you want to make sure that you have really tight glue joints. Clamping pressure really helps, but you can't clamp out really big bows without putting strain in the wood. So as you can see here, these are some prepared strips that we sell here. It's a really nice tight joint. So I'll be able to apply glue to those. With just a couple of clamps, I should be able to get a board that I'm happy with. I'm just using a couple of simple F clamps here. Just want to set them up and get them adjusted before I start smearing glue all over the place. Let's see.
Do they sell those here?
Yes, we do sell all different styles of clamps. They're actually right in this aisle here. Depending on what kind of woodworking you're doing, we won't add just like, oh, you can never have enough clamps. I tend to agree with that. But if you're just doing cutting boards, you could get by with a few clamps. That'll be plenty. So you can see I just put everything on edge.
If you have a piece of wood that doesn't have the vice edge,
Yeah.
is there a preferred way? You use a scraper, just as you did, or if it's not real bad?
If it's not really bad, you might be able to scribe a line, make a straight line and sand or scrape that line. The best way to go about it is typically a jointer for edge joining. Another approach would be, just a hand plane. If you're comfortable with a hand plane, you have some hand plane skills, that would be a great way to clean it up. Sometimes just by zipping it through the table saw, that'll give you a clean edge. I'm working on cardboard here, just so I don't make a big mess. I'm not being shy with the glue. I want to see plenty of squeeze out. That way I know that I have some good joints here. My big concern is making sure that the faces are flush. Most folks have tools to make sure that the ends are square or to shape the ends. That can be done with a hand saw or a miter saw. But it's really the face, when you start talking about big machinery like thickness planers, where you have some trouble. So I'm just applying a little bit of pressure. When you get glue on there and start tightening, everything's going to want to slide around. So I just want to apply a little bit of pressure at first. And then what I'll do is start to wiggle these boards until they're flush or close to it. And I'll continue to add more pressure, more clamp pressure. Okay, let's see here.
So you're using maple and purple board?
Maple and walnut for this one. So walnut's relatively open grain, so this wouldn't be great for food preparation. This is definitely more decorative. Again, I'm just slowly working through, making sure it's as flush as I can get it. And then I'll apply some more pressure. as that glue hardens up, it's going to be very hard. So you want to clean up as much of it ahead of time as possible. With cutting boards, I'm not too fussy about it, so I'll just use a damp rag and wipe off as much of the excess glue as I can. And what I'm doing is examining my joints here to make sure they don't have any large gaps. If I had any large gaps, I'd be reaching for another clamp and getting some more pressure on there. But everything seems to be closing up pretty good. The set time on wood glue like this, on PVA, polyvinyl glue, is, they usually say 30 minutes in the clamps and then not to strain the joint after that. I get really weird about it. I like to leave everything in the clamps overnight if I can, at least a few hours. If you'd like to pass that around too and see what we've done there. So after after a couple hours in the clamps, I'd be ready to come out, and then we could trim the ends square, do any shaping and sanding, and then get ready for oil. Let's see. I want to take a look at, is that other board floating around? Yeah, let's get that back up and maybe we'll sand that a little bit and get some oil on it. Thank you. If you look at this board here, has a really even profile all the way around it. That was done with a roundover bit and a router, which is a great way to create a profile. If you don't have a router, you can always form an edge by hand. If you want a really subtle profile, you might just get some sandpaper and break the edge. If you made more of a paddle shape, maybe say like this piece of cherry, you can reach for a rasp or file. I really like the rasp, something like this. Typically when you look at like a mill file, you don't think of woodworking, but a rasp like this is really effective on wood, and you can just start to ease the edge. So you can see I still have lots of bandsaw marks, and it's not a very even profile. So what I can do is just start to shape this by hand until I get a profile that I'm happy with. So as far as basic tools to get into woodworking, something like a rasp, and a card scraper for surface prep, it's really incredible what you can do with it. For straight cuts, something like the Japanese pool saw is really awesome. Have any of you guys used the Japanese pool saw? Yeah, so the big difference between Japanese pool saw and like a Western saw is that these cut on the pull stroke as opposed to the push stroke. So the nice thing about these is even though the blade's really thin, because the blade's always under tension when you pull it, it cuts really straight and really clean. I'll actually make a sample cut for you guys real quick here so you can see how quickly you can get through something. So here's a piece of cherry. You'll notice that many of these have two edges. There's a really fine side and a really coarse side. The coarse side is for ripping, which means going with the grain. So if I wanted to make this narrower, I would use the really aggressive teeth. By cutting cross grain though, I want to use the fine teeth. That'll produce a better cut. It'll be a little smoother. So on something like this, I just like to use my thumb to kind of guide the blade to get me in a start position. And I'm just using my arm, just really basic body mechanics. And you don't really want to force it. You just get it started and then you can start cutting in here. That doesn't take much. It leaves a really thin curve. So it cuts pretty quickly. You can do some really basic shaping with that saw as well. Are there any questions up to this point maybe about gluing up or forming or shaping the board?
I have a comment.
Sure.
Your end grains, you alternate the end grains on each piece or else you'll end up with a cup.
Yeah, that tends to be a school of thought. I don't always pay much attention to that. Reason being, with this many pieces, we have a lot of, what it's referring to is that the growth rings in relationship to the face of the wood. So depending on where that growth ring exits the face, whether it's parallel to the face or perpendicular to the face, there's a school up that really says that can dictate the way that the wood moves. So in the radial plane, the way that the growth ring goes across the wood, it's going to move more than across like the thickness. So wood tends to move sideways and not in its thickness. So by paying attention to like which way you flip those boards, it could make a difference, yeah. Especially if you're doing a big, wide glue up on something like this. Certainly something you want to pay attention to, but you know, as long as you're not soaking in water, you're gonna be okay. Yeah. Anything else? All right, cool. So after you've done some scraping, you can usually do just a little bit of sanding. It really, if you have a really flat glue up, you can get by without doing a whole lot of scraping and go straight for the sandpaper. You might need to start with something more aggressive. Let's see, on this one here, I have 120 grit. So I'll do a little bit of sanding on here and see how quickly we can get this cleaned up. Let's see here. If you have a low spot, it's really tempting to get on the edge of the pad to kind of clean up that area a little quicker. What we end up doing is dishing out or making a little belly in your workpiece, and it can damage the edge of your pad. So you always want to try to make sure you keep if you're using like an orbital sander, just keep it as flat as you can and just continue to work the surface. So this one here, I probably could have done a little more scraping. I could knock that down with sandpaper, but I have to stay with an aggressive grit. But you can see very quickly it starts to clean up. I'm going to sand on one of these a little bit and we'll put some oil on it. This is just a piece of maple that I had floating around the shop. It kind of had this really gentle edge on it. It came from a live edge board. So functionally, you know, it might just be a cheese board or something, not something that's going to see a lot of wear, but it's kind of a neat design. So just so I can show you guys some oiling, I'm going to sand this a little bit and we'll apply some oil to it. I don't want to keep you guys here all day. What I'm looking for is that I'm removing any kind of surface defect. If you look at this board here, I'm going to rake it across the light so you can kind of see there's still a horizontal line here. That's from when the board passed through the thickness planer. The last few inches got scooped when it came off of the bed roller, but that'll take a little bit of sanding to get out. So I'm just going to work through the grits so we can get some oil on there. Let's see. So that was 120. I'm going to go to 150 next. I'm using a random orbital sander. You can, it makes things quicker. If you're doing just a small board, you don't necessarily need a sander. This could all very easily be done by hand with just a sanding block. Before I go on to my last grit here, there's some really hard edges, so I want to knock those down a little bit and then sand them. So I'll just use this rasp, just because it's a little quicker than sanding. Flip that around. All right. Maybe break this section a little bit as well. All I'm doing is just removing any really hard edges. Obviously, something like a cutting board is going to be handled, and you don't want any sharp points on there. All right. I'm going to snag the paper from here. And now I'm just going to gently feather all of those out. All right. So when you're finishing a cutting board, you have to keep in mind that this is something that's going to be used and handled and cleaned and cut on. So the best finish to go with is a food grade mineral oil. That won't go rancid, and it's very easy to renew or refinish. If you went with like a polyurethane, something that's film building, every time you used it, you would be flaking little bits of finish off into whatever you were eating. So something like mineral oil is food safe and easy to renew. So before we get that oil on there, I'm going to hit this one last time with 220 grit just to make it a little smoother. Surface prep is really going to give you, the nicest finish on your board. So you want to take time and make sure that you're thoroughly sanding all the edges, that you're working through your grits. I'm really rushing through this one just because it's not the most exciting thing to watch. But you do want to take your time and make sure that everything looks really uniform.
What's the difference between using mineral oil versus cutting board oil, like from John Boo's or something?
It's probably very similar. The only difference might be that it might be some kind of mixed formulation. So if you look at something like this, this is mineral oil and beeswax. It's a blend. So something like that's going to hold up a little better than mineral oil. I like to use both products on my cutting boards. I find that by starting with something like mineral oil, that tends to soak in a lot deeper than the wax will. So I like to apply some oil, and then after I've given the oil a chance to really soak in and maybe dry for a couple days, I like to buff in some of the wax. I think that gives me a little better finish. So we're just wiping off some of the dust here. And throw on some gloves. Mineral oil doesn't harm your skin at all. I'm going to throw on gloves though anyways. What you'll find is when you're washing your hands, if you use just mineral oil, it makes your hands like really silky. It's kind of nice, but it seems like you can't wash the oil off. Okay. So we're just going to use a cotton rag. I'm going to just apply the oil directly to the board. Get that out of the way there. You'll notice the first time you apply finish to a board, it's really going to absorb a lot of oil. We'll just drink it right up. So I'm not being too particular about it. Unlike a film building finish or top coat where you really don't want streaks or anything, the name of the game with this oil is just to cover everything and allow it to really suck it up. And by the time you wipe it all back, you'll be left with a super even finish. So I'm going to apply some more oil here. All right. If I'm batching out a lot of cutting boards, what I like to do is get a Tupperware container, or like a almost like a deep cookie sheet or cake pan, and I'll get a couple bottles of this and just fill the entire pan and just dunk them and let them soak for a couple minutes. Because you can see, even though I've wiped that on there, it's starting to get some dry spots already. Can you guys see that if I kind of tip it in the light? Yeah, so this wood will take a lot of this oil the first time you finish it. And you want to continue to apply oil through the life of the board. If the board ever seems like it's getting dry or like it's just bare wood, or raw wood, then it's time for more oil. When you're cleaning these, you don't want to really scrub them too heavily. I mean, make sure they're clean, but you don't want to soak them or put them in the dishwasher. And when you let them dry, you would never want to let it sit flat to dry on your counter, otherwise it'll want to cup on you. And that's a big concern. If one side is exposed to air and the other isn't, then it'll dry out more, and that's where you get that cupping from. So by leaning it against something like your backsplash to dry, that's going to make sure that you keep a flat board. After that's soaked in a little bit, I just try to wipe off some of the excess. It does have an oily filling, and you'll find in a couple days it tends to penetrate more and dry a little more. And after that, you can buff in some of this wax. It doesn't hurt to buff in some of the wax immediately, though. We could apply some of that as well. So I'll pass that around with a rag if you guys want to check that out. If you look at the top side, that's the side that we did the surface prep on. It looks pretty good. We could have spent more time on it. You'll see there are some swirl marks, from the sander. So if you sand by hand and sand with the grain, you'll be left with a really even finish. If you look at the underside, we didn't sand that at all. And the underside, you can see a lot of chatter from the planer. So it is important to spend your time and sand it. That way you're left with a smooth board. After lots of use, if your board starts to really get chopped up, you can always re-sand it and apply more oil to maintain the finish. Are there any questions?
On that initial coating of that mineral oil, does it bring out the roughness of the grain? Do you ever wet sand first?
I don't typically find that it raises the grain. That top side you're on there, that's the side that I just sanded. That underside hasn't had any surface prep. I work mostly with maple and I haven't seen a problem with it. But yeah, in some cases, if you apply that oil and you find that your board maybe is a little rough, you can always go to that last grit and just give it a light sanding, wipe it down, and start to apply more oil. You can see
more
it
with open grain than closed grain.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, if you're using a walnut or white oak, red oak, anything that really has that really open grain, it's ring coarse. Yeah, you might have some more problems with surface prep or finishing.
Okay, what boards do you don't recommend to buy?
Again, it comes down to the use. So you'll see, I'm sure you've all seen, like, there's really decorative boards that's all purple heart and walnut and maybe Paduke, and they're really bright colors. That's awesome, but you have to remember that those exotic hardwoods have lots of oils in them that aren't great for for food. I don't know that they're poisonous, but you don't really want to be eating off of them too much. Thanks. So I find something like maple is probably the best to use as far as just from like a sanitary standpoint. But those open grain woods, those are the ones you're gonna have to be careful with. You wouldn't want to be chopping meat on them. But for something like bread, if it's just a decorative board, something like that's fine. Using something more decorative.
What kind of hardwood would go along with maple to do inlays?
To do inlays? Again, it kind of comes down to that final application. So like, obviously walnut is really dark brown. That makes for a nice contrast and makes for a nice inlay, but it is open grain.
Closed grain though.
Closed grain, to get some contrast, probably cherry. So you also want to think about how the wood's going to age. So maple's going to go more yellow. It won't get too dark, but it will yellow. And cherry, there's that cherry board there. It's not super dark right now, but with time, especially as it gets UV light, cherry really darkens up. So cherry would be a good closed grain option.
Okay, how do you clean the board? after you put food on it? Do you put it in soap and water? Or?
Yeah. You don't want to use too much soap, but yeah, soap, water, rinse, pat it dry, wipe it dry, and then lean it against something to make sure it completely dries.
Okay.
Yeah, and then if the wood again starts to feel really dry or bare, that's when you'd want to reach for the butcher block oil and apply some more finish to it.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, so it's not so intimidating. This is one of the most basic projects. The biggest hiccups with making something like this is tooling and equipment. You know, if you wanted to make big butcher blocks that were made out of all different species and you're processing your own lumber, then you need like a planer and a joiner. But if you want to just make a little board, you can always just buy strips like these and glue them up yourselves. And all it requires is glue and clamps. All right. Cool. All right.
Thanks.
Hey, thanks for coming, everybody. If there aren't any questions, we'll wrap up. We really appreciate you coming out today. Hopefully you took something away and go make some cutting boards. All right.
Thank
Cool.
you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, he's got-